In this video, we're going to look at how to solve a polynomial inequality. And what do I mean by a polynomial inequality? Well, the best way to see what I mean is to see an example. So here we have x squared minus 1 is greater than x plus 5. All right, so if we had an equal sign right here, what would that be called? Well, with an equal sign right here and the highest exponent equal to 2, this whole thing would be a quadratic equation. And you probably already know how to solve quadratic equations, and that's not what we're going to do today. We're going to solve a quadratic inequality caused by that inequality sign. All right, so let's do it. So we're going to start off the same way that we would start if this was a quadratic equation. So in case you forgot, we'll write this over here. Step 1, we're going to make our inequality not equal to 0, but I guess you could say unequal to 0. All right, so let's just say we're going to pull everything over to one side. That makes a little more sense in this case. All right, so we're going to pull everything over to the left. All right, cool. How do we do this? Well, we have an x here and a 5 here, so we can go ahead and take the x here away from that side and take the 5 away from that side. And as you know, everything you do to one side of an inequality, you have to do to the other side as well. So we're going to take the x away and take the 5 away. So on the right side, we get that x squared minus x, negative 1 minus 5 is negative 6 is greater than, and that cancels, which is what we wanted, greater than 0. Okay, cool. So now we have an inequality that is greater than 0. Now, if this were an equation, it would be pretty easy at this point. We would factor and solve. Well, good news. This next step is still to factor. So step 2, we're going to factor. After everything is greater than 0, we can now factor. So if you recall, we're going to be looking for two numbers that multiply to give us our C and add to give us our B. So our two numbers in this case have to have a product of negative 6 and a sum of negative 1. So can you think of two numbers with a product of negative 6 and a sum of negative 1? If you said negative 3 and a positive 2, you are correct. Very nice. Okay, and as you know, we're going to split the x's up. We have x on one side, x on the other side, and this is greater than 0. Okay, so far, everything looks exactly like what you already know how to do. But here's where it gets a little different. All right, so we have two numbers that are being multiplied, or two numbers, or two expressions rather, that are being multiplied are x minus 3 and x plus 2. And when the two numbers are multiplied, our answer is greater than 0. Now, what's another way of saying greater than 0? Yes, another way of saying greater than 0 is positive. So we have two numbers being multiplied, and the answer is positive. How can we get a positive answer if we multiply two things by each other? Well, if you think about it, the only way to get a positive answer when you multiply two things by each other is that the two things have to be the same sign. Very good. All right. So once we figure out that both things have to have the same sign, then the rest of this becomes pretty easy. So now we have either, so let's write either here, x minus 3 is greater than 0. And so remember now, both of them have to be the same sign. So either they're both positive or they're both negative. So either x minus 3 is greater than 0 and x plus 2 is greater than 0. So that's just like saying either they're both greater than 0, which means positive, or, this is a big fat or right here, or they're both negative. So how would we write that? X minus 3 is less than 0 and x plus 2 is also less than 0. So it's either they're both positive or they're both negative. Now, what do we do at this point? All right, so now we can solve it. We're almost at the very end. So to solve it, it's just a linear inequality at this point, or a bunch of linear inequalities. Add 3 to both sides, and we get that either x is greater than 3, and again here, take 2 from both sides, x is greater than negative 2, or, big fat or there. So we do the same for the other side, and we get x is less than 3. And just in case you missed it, all I did was add 3 to both sides here. And let's do the same here. Take away 2 from both sides, and we get, and x is less than negative 2. Okay, great. So now if we look at the two things on the left side, over here, x is greater than 3 and x is greater than negative 2. Well, this is redundant if we say both of them. By saying x is greater than 3, we already know that x has to be greater than negative 2 as well. So that is one of our solutions. And if we go over to the other side, x is less than 3 and x is less than negative 2, again, redundant. If we know that x is less than negative 2, we already know that it also has to be less than 3. So our two answers I just put in boxes, and now we can go to another example. Okay, great. So here is our second example. I'm going to go through the first few steps, the first 2 steps a little faster because that's what we're already used to. But when we get to the third step, there's something slightly different. So make sure you stay tuned. Okay, so let's get everything over to one side. That's step 1. We want to make everything, in this case, less than 0. So step 1, we make it all go over to one side. So I'm trying to get everything over on the left side. So I'm subtracting 4 and I'm adding t squared. And so for my first step, I get t squared plus 3t minus 4 is less than 0. So all I did was order it in the way that we are used to seeing a quadratic function, with the square first, then the t, then no variable. All right, so that's step 1 done. Now we are ready for our second step, which is factoring. So again, we're looking for two numbers with a product of -4 and the sum of +3. And our two numbers are 4 and -1. So here we have t plus 4 and t minus 1 is less than 0. So that's step 2. We've factored. But now is where things get a little bit different. So this is the part you were probably waiting for. In this case, we have the product being less than 0, so it is negative. Now, how can we multiply two terms or two expressions and get a negative answer? The only way to get a negative answer if we multiply two things is that the sign has to be different. Exactly. So the sign must be different in order to get a negative answer. Okay, cool. So what do we do with that? All right, so we're going to go with the whole either or thing again. So either if t plus 4 is positive, greater than 0, positive, so either that is positive and, well, if that's positive, the other one would have to be the other thing. So the other one, meaning t minus 1, would then have to be negative, less than 0. Or, big fat or here, once again, either that or t plus 4 is negative, so the other way around, and t minus 1 is positive. All right, so now that we know that, we can solve each and every one of these little things here. So we can take away 4 from both sides. Here we can add 1 to both sides. All right, let's write what that would be. So t is greater than negative 4 and t is less than 1. Or, again, big fat or, t is less than negative 4 and t is greater than 1. All right, so only one of these two things makes sense. So either this makes sense or this makes sense. So one of these two things will be the answer. Now, is it possible, and I'm looking on the right side, is it possible for t to be less than negative 4 and greater than 1? Absolutely not. It's not possible for a number to be less than negative 4 and greater than 1. That's no good. So this solution makes no sense and we can ignore it. Is it possible, however, for t to be greater than negative 4 and less than 1? Absolutely yes. So therefore, this is our answer.